Welcome to the Etsy Conversations podcast, featuring inspiring interviews with Etsy shop owners, hosted by Ijama Elazu.
Hi, and welcome to the Etsy Conversations podcast. I'm your host, Ijama, and I thank you for joining me for another episode. This week, my guest is Tayyaba, and she runs the Etsy shop Reserved Only. Tayyaba, thank you so much for being my guest, and welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
You're so welcome. Now, I found Tayyaba on a couple of ways. I read your article on Etsy Rank, which I will link to in this episode, in the show notes for this episode, because I think when I read it, it really spoke to me, and I felt like I could really relate because I had a similar experience, and it was about a bad review that you got and just how you recovered from it. But before we get to all that, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do on Etsy?
Yeah, so my name's Tayyaba. I am happily married in Houston, Texas, with my twins, Sahar and Nasser, and I started Etsy really because of my kids. I know it's very cliche. A lot of Etsy, owners that are moms start that, but it was really inspiring. I've been sewing for a long time, sewed mainly for myself. And then once I started deciding, hey, you know what, I really want to start a different, part of my life. Let's go ahead and start an Etsy company. My husband was really supportive. My friends were. And that's when I started making products. And that's kind of how I got into it.
Nice. So Etsy was your first port of call. You didn't, or did you consider selling on any other platforms?
I had been a buyer on Etsy since 2009. So it only seemed natural for me personally to be a seller on Etsy just because I was very familiar with how it worked. I will say being a seller now has changed my mindset a bit, but
Really?
it was a no-brainer. Etsy was easy to start. It's just always had so many more positives for someone new.
Yeah. Now, you also have an e-commerce website where you sell through as well. That's reservedonly.com. I will link to reservedonly.com in the show notes for this episode. Did you start your website in tandem with your Etsy shop, or did you wait for your Etsy shop to grow a little bit and then you moved over to your own website? Not moved over, but started that as well.
I started maybe a year after. That's when I felt more confident with myself as a business owner and with my products. When I first started my Reserved Only shop, Etsy store, it was actually based on pocket scarves. It was something that I just wanted really easy and accessible for moms to have that variation. And now if you look at the site, it's really centered around baby gifts. Yeah. So that's another reason why I liked Etsy as a platform, because it offered me that flexibility to change my business as I go. And now that I have the foundation, that's how I started my e-commerce platform.
Okay. Now, between running your own e-commerce platform and Etsy, about what balance of time do you spend between the two?
So there is a trade-off. The trade-off is really losing a lot of sleep and just personal time. Yeah. But the good thing is that the e-commerce site is done at my own pace, my own time, and I still have the Etsy to rely on in case I decide to get rid of the e-commerce store and say it's way complicated. It's a new venture, and I'm still learning as I go, not only from making mistakes, but then also getting feedback and seeing, well, how does this work from a cost benefit?
Yeah. Okay. Now, do you recall when you first opened your Etsy shop, about how long it took before you got that first sale?
The first sale that I received that was not a family member or friend being supportive, I would say maybe in less than 2 months. And it was really exciting. It was like, oh my God, who is this person I have? And then I started feeling like I got to do this right. Like this is something that to really showcase my product and get out there.
Yeah. Now, out the door, when you first opened your shop, did you have everything together? Did you already have your branding in place, and so did you have packaging and shipping supplies that all tied into your brand, or did all that come with time as your shop was growing?
I had the basics of branding and packaging. However, now that I'm not necessarily a seasoned vet, but I do understand the whole concept of why branding, packaging, and just styling your products is important. I mean, you can look at my past sales and reviews and see the photos. It was pretty like homemade situation. Yeah. And now when you look at the photos that are on there, they're a lot more professional and polished. So that is one of the things that as a new shop owner, I completely identify with. You're not going to be perfect unless someone really showed you everything and anything to be perfect.
Yeah.
But it just took time for me.
Okay. So coming out the gates when you decided you wanted to sell on Etsy. So some people, I found that we have two camps. There are people who just go for it and then learn as they go. And then there are those who do their homework and read and try and learn as much as possible and then come on. Which camp do you fall into?
I thought whenever I started, if you would have asked me, I would have said the latter, which is, oh yeah, I was so prepared. I read up on it and then I jumped into it. And once it actually started, I was like, oh no, I fall in that other category. I had no idea what I was doing.
Yeah.
You know, what I thought I knew, it's completely different when you're actually doing it.
Yeah. So let's talk about your craft and your designs. What's the inspiration other than your babies behind the products that you make and the designs that you come up with?
So the whole basis of it is to just make gifting and how do I say this properly? Gifting and providing functionality for soon-to-be moms, and not only from a mom receiving a gift, but the person's intention who's purchasing it. Yeah. I really wanted to make that whole buying process easy. And there are a lack of modern prints or just having unique gifts. Mm-hmm. You can easily find, like nowadays, we have problems with Target stealing designs from Etsy owners.
Oh, yes. Mm-hmm.
Being able to easily manufacture it. For me, I just wanted to stick with the classics. What are classic gifts that all moms appreciate, that are functional, honestly authentic, and they could use over and over again with their babies? Okay. Like I just wanted to stay true to myself as a mom, and then also knowing other moms, like what do they want?
Okay. And it helps, being a mom, because then you're your own target. So it makes it easier for you, I assume, to come up with ideas of things that you would like.
Correct. Yeah, it is daunting though to take it. It is very daunting to see, okay, what prints, patterns, designs go well, thinking for other moms. Every mom is unique and different. Mm-hmm. So try to think of ways that will maybe capture everyone in my target market. I would still say that's the hardest thing that I lose sleep over.
Oh. Do you find that sometimes you get into a creative rut and you're just not getting any new infusion of ideas? And how do you get yourself out?
So I do get into creative ruts. I experienced that earlier this summer, actually, whenever I felt just stifled with other makers. I felt a little overwhelmed, like this is such a saturated industry or just area of working, where I just felt like my products aren't unique. I started doubting myself. I started questioning myself and saying, as much as I appreciate the sales and support that I currently have, it just didn't feel enough. Yeah. And for me, having someone like my husband to talk to, or best friends or family, they just said, you know what, you're putting a lot of pressure on yourself. You're losing the whole purpose, which is the soul and basis of your brand. Yeah. Why don't you just take a breather? Which is the great thing about being a small business. You can take time off when you aren't ready to continue. And then from there, it just really helped pick myself back up, like playing with my kids, seeing, I have a brand new niece that's on the way, so having that new baby kind of gave me life again. Yeah. I'm like, okay, this is why I put my heart and soul into this shop.
Yeah. Oh, good. Let's talk about promoting your Etsy shop. What do you do? What's your strategy for shop promotion? Do you rely primarily on social media? Do you do Etsy promoted listings? Or do you have a mix of things that you do to get traffic?
So I am still learning the best formula, as people say, or that magic. But I will say social media drives up quite a bit of traffic to my site. Mm-hmm. And then in order to retain people within the Etsy searches, and get them to go on my site, I have noticed using Etsy on sale has made a difference, and using those to have automated promoted listings in conjunction with Etsy's promoted listings, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And Etsy on sale is actually an app, right, that you use to put items on your in your shop on sale. Is that correct?
Correct. Yes. Yeah. And they help with, I believe that also helps with that renewal process too.
Okay. And for the promoted listings, for you, was it a learn as you go process and tweak as you go, or did you know what you were doing when it came to promoted listings?
I didn't know what I was doing at first. So I had YouTubed and Google like crazy. And then I realized one day while I was looking at it, I said, wait, this is kind of getting to the point to where I'm getting information overload. It's starting to become a little depressive because you don't know what's real information and fake information on the internet anymore. Mm-hmm. I said, instead of wasting my time, let me just figure it out for myself. Yeah. And the thing that is the downside to that is you do have to invest some money. Sometimes like Etsy on sale or just doing promoted listings. But once I found the right groove for me personally, that was within my budget, that I think was the key aspect of what I'm going to do.
Okay. And so would you say that doing that, you've got a good return on the investment that you made in it?
So my target goals on reason for investing was to drive more traffic. I was okay with, I would love to have more sales, and I did receive the sales that I needed. But I just felt like I got the views that I wanted. That was my main goal. Okay. Was to drive more people to it.
Okay. So one of the things I like to ask sellers, and I do this for the benefit of just everyone in the Etsy community, is whether or not you've received, you've had to deal with any disputes or not positive feedback on Etsy as a seller, and if you have, how you dealt with that.
So for me, I did receive less than a 5-star review. I haven't had any disputes, but that less than 5-star review was like it basically was like a stab in the heart whenever I first received it. And what I did in order to kind of deal with that process, I gave myself 24 hours to just kind of vent to the right appropriate, audience that I have that I trust. Yeah. And seeing that bad review honestly broke like my confidence level. But I knew not to email that individual, even though I really wanted to, and start defending myself right away. I said, This is not like appropriate customer service. We are, as sellers, like customer oriented, and it's all about improving myself. And even though hearing the response from the buyer saying the reason why the individual basically said, hey, I didn't give you a 5-star review is because it didn't look like something I bought from the store. And that just was one of those moments where I was like, are you kidding me? Like, you're joking, right? Like that can't be the reason why I got less than 5-star reviews. And so going through that, I said, okay, if it was me and I said something like that, how would I take that situation and work it differently? Yeah. I will admit it gave me the leg up working in restaurants, during my high school, early college years, to have that customer service orientation of how do you get through it when there's a mistake in the kitchen, even though you're the server situation. Yeah. So working through that, it's just giving yourself time, and then honestly talking to the buyer and saying, you know what, I'm really sorry you had that experience. Just address it like an adult and say, how can I fix it, and make it better? And if they're unhappy still, even though they'll say, oh, well, maybe if you give me a free product, which is not right.
No.
And that's considered extortion, that would tell you what the intention of that buyer was too. So looking at the intention, seeing how you can fix the product, is it something that you can easily fix, and really just not letting it affect your core, I think is the best way to address those situations, in my opinion.
Okay, thank you. And I read your article on Etsy Rank. I will link to that. And what I was saying at the beginning was I could so relate because I was coming off a similar experience, and we talked about how it just hits you so personally when someone gives you less than 5 stars. It could be 4 stars, it could be 3 stars, but we all think, I did this myself. It's 5-star quality, and so anything less becomes kind of personal because what we're doing isn't necessarily coming off a manufacturing line.
Exactly. We're not big companies.
Yeah, no, we're not. So it's like everything we touched by hand. So if you say it's less than perfect, all of a sudden you're attacking me as a person. Not really, but
yeah, I think buyers who don't fully understand Etsy, because there's quite a few buyers that do get Etsy and the whole intention behind it, and connecting creatives to people who genuinely appreciate that market. And then there's another group that just see it as, oh, I'm just trying to get something that doesn't look cookie cutter so I look cool. Not really. There's a lot more to it. We're actual people,
Yes. So I will link to that article. I think for anyone who has experienced less than 5 stars and you just want to find someone who you can relate to that has gone through the same thing, T's article on that is excellent. You'll know you're not alone. I know there are many of us, but when it first happens, you just feel like it's just you, and it's not the end of the world. We all recover from it.
Yeah, we definitely do. It takes time. It's a grieving process.
It does. Yes, it is.
But we get through it. And the great thing about it is when you, like with your platform that you have, it's a great way of knowing, hey, I'm not alone. When you hear someone else say it, it's easier than to swallow it for that time being and work through it the way you need to.
Yeah. Now, T, I also know about you because back in July of this year, 2017, there was an email that came out from Etsy that was actually from you. And it was concerning the whole issue of net neutrality and what we as sellers need to know about net neutrality and what we can do in order to be proactive and just make sure that our interests and our concerns are heard. So do you mind if we talk about that now?
No, not at all. I actually love talking about this this whole group. It's called Etsy Changemakers. Okay. And it was a group of people that, it was the second time Etsy had did it. And it was a group of, I believe it was 12 to 16 of us. I can't remember exact numbers, but we all had similar experiences in the sense of, hey, we're small business owners. Policies are changing that are affecting our businesses. We're not a big business. And Etsy was so awesome for just putting this together and showing people in Congress, hey, these people need a voice. We're here to provide it for you guys. And you need to be aware of the policies that are changing and the laws are affecting them in ways that are negatively impacting them.
So the Changemakers group, was it a group of sellers that banded together, or did Etsy invite you to become a part of that group?
Etsy invited us, and they had criterias that they were looking for in the sense of, hey, these are people that are advocates that are willing to hear. And so we want to pull people from these states or local representatives so they can have that conversation face to face, because a lot of representatives don't have the time, or they're not open to having conversations discussing situations like that.
Okay. And so you were able to go to Washington, D.C. and represent the interest of sellers. Now, for anyone who doesn't know, can you explain what net neutrality is?
So with net neutrality, it's basically saying, hey, we want a fair, open platform that doesn't allow one business, how do I say this? One business leverage over another business. It should just be even. We don't want anyone to be able to pay and get more service or have better, like internet service than a person who is just getting regular basic internet, you know?
Yes.
It's just providing, honestly, just a fair playground when it comes to the internet.
Yes. And so there has been talk recently of, and I shouldn't say recently because it's been going on for a while now.
It's been going on for at least the last 5 years.
Yes. And of their, basically the internet, not people paying to play in essence, where if people or organizations or corporations are able to buy, and I also want to make sure I say this correctly because I don't want to disseminate incorrect information. And if anyone is listening and I'm not getting this right, please do come to the website, go to convome.com and this post and add your thoughts and correct anything that I say that might be incorrect. But organizations or corporations might be able to pay to get something like faster internet, and those who can't afford it might not be able to compete on the same level or to show up in, well, I don't know if it's actual searches, but
yes, actually you're explaining it exactly how I understand it. Okay. And it's not even people who can't afford it. It's just saying, for example, if I'm paying the basic, internet fees, and then someone else is paying 3-4 times as much and it's booting me to a lower level of my searches. I mean, it's really unfair because I'm paying for the same space as they are.
Yeah. Yes. And so, as sellers, how that affects us is because we are running businesses that are on the internet, we want to be able to compete on a level playing field. And so, I don't want to say Etsy is asking because it's not really an Etsy thing. It's just that, we sell on that platform. But
yeah, and that's the thing I think that Etsy was most concerned about. I mean, people have options to use other platforms, but think of someone on Amazon Handmade. Mm-hmm. If Amazon decides to pay 10, 15 times more than what Etsy's paying to show up in searches, it's really not fair to the sellers. It leaves the sellers at a disadvantage more than anything. Mm-hmm. And the most curious thing I experienced when working with the Etsy Changemakers group for the newsletter, especially in getting the word out, is receiving the negative review, or not negative reviews, but the negative feedback of just having my involvement there with the Changemakers.
Of you being involved with the Changemakers.
Yes. So there was that email that was sent out on my behalf. Mm-hmm. It was me working with Etsy and saying collaboratively, like, hey, we do really need to send some kind of awareness to everyone and get them involved in understanding, hey, just read up on net neutrality. This is something directly affecting you guys as sellers. Mm-hmm. And so when Etsy Changemakers asked me, like, hey, are you okay with this? I was totally on board because, one, I am a seller. I may not be a full-time seller, but knowing full-time sellers especially, that's their livelihood that's being potentially affected. And receiving the negative criticism in the sense of, oh, Etsy needs to keep their business out of my personal space when it comes to net neutrality. Etsy doesn't know what they're talking about. Leave it to the politicians. This is when mixing the line. I think people really just missed the point, which was, one, hey, we're just raising awareness and this is something directly affecting you. If you don't like this platform of how we're disseminating the information, that's fine. You can pick and choose, but we just want you to be aware. Like, I think that was the whole purpose and why I even agreed to it, because I didn't get paid for it. It wasn't affiliated. I didn't receive anything from doing it with Etsy Changemakers, but it was just to help people get that knowledge and awareness.
Okay. And if it makes anyone feel better, I will try and find a non-Etsy related source of information that explains what net neutrality is and how it affects you as someone who has a business on the internet. And hopefully that might help to dispel any concerns that Etsy is dabbling into people's personal issues. It really is not an Etsy thing. It's bigger than Etsy, but it affects all of us, regardless of where you live on the internet. Now, T, you were saying that even though you did get some negative responses from the email, there was some good that came from it.
Yes, actually, the great thing about getting that negative feedback is the fact that it showed that people were reading the newsletter that Etsy sent out. They were looking into it and saying, hey, even though we may not agree with you, I thought was just an indicator of people are talking about net neutrality. So it's not something that we're completely ignoring.
Yeah. And that's good. It's always good to know that people are talking about it, because if nobody's saying anything, then that's a bad sign. And if people are talking, then at least the word is getting out. So it's all good.
Yeah.
Now, T, what advice, well, before I have you give advice, I want to ask, what are you doing now selling on Etsy that's really working well for you?
So for me, what's been working really great is, one, refining my brand. And that brand, I think, has been the foundation of just really laying the platform of the offerings of products, making sure they're cohesive. Because once your branding is cohesive, your products become easily cohesive and they start to flow better. The other thing is social media engagement. I know it's time consuming. I know it's tasking, but having that engagement lets people know you're a real person. So I would definitely focus on what kind of content you're providing, and then showing that you can learn and grow from these experiences, I think will only help you with your Etsy shop.
Okay. And do you do all your own social media marketing yourself, or do you have any tools that you use to help you automate the process, at least partially?
So I do use the Later app. I used the free app for a very long time. Later has been an awesome app in the sense of just keeping a home balance, to be honest with you. I'm able to do it. I won't lie, full transparency. I run to the bathroom, pretend I have to take a break, and it takes less than 2 seconds for me to go ahead and post it. It is something that I take the time to schedule out for the 2 weeks ahead. I do mine in 2-week sprints. Okay. Because I can set up all my social media that I need to do for 2 weeks within 30 minutes or an hour.
Oh, okay. That's good. And just to be clear, the Later app helps with scheduling on Instagram, right?
Instagram, Facebook, Pinterest. Yeah, it's a really great app.
Oh, all of them. Okay, that's good to know. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Now, what advice would you give to that new seller who's listening and is feeling overwhelmed with just the whole process of getting set up and just getting up and running on Etsy?
So what I would give, like the best advice that I ever received was, hey, don't give up. Don't shut down your store. Use this as a motivator to go ahead and continue doing what you're doing. If you don't get a negative review, you're pretty much being naive to your shop in some ways. So getting a negative review for me in the very beginning of being a business owner was great, because now I have a completely different mindset, a completely different attitude. I can only imagine if this happened maybe 2-3 years later down the road, how that would impact me even more.
Yeah.
You just honestly, you learn how to build your own confidence as you go with making these little things happen.
Yeah. And a lot of it is just, as you, like you said, as you go along, there will be things you cannot anticipate. And when they come along, there's a community you can ask, other sellers, but you will figure stuff out somehow.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, you will. You don't have a choice as long as you don't give up.
Yeah, yeah. Now, T, do you have an Etsy shop shout out? Is there a shop that or a seller that you'd like to mention for whatever reason?
I do. So I love Grace Pollock. She is the owner and maker behind the Maker Mountain Fabrics. She is who I source my fabric from, and she has amazing customer service. She's always about improving herself and then just making her products awesome. She's one of my big inspirations for like who I strive for.
Oh, fantastic. And I like it when sellers source from other sellers. That's good.
Yeah.
Yeah. It keeps the community going and growing.
Yep.
Okay, so I will link to Grace's shop. That's Maker Mountain Fabric. So you can go check her out, check out her fabric and see what she's doing in her shop. Yep. T, what's the best way people can reach you if they want to get in touch with you?
They can get in touch with me over Etsy or even on my e-commerce site. There's multiple ways. I'm super accessible. Even on my Instagram, they can always send me a direct message. I'm on Instagram as Reserved Only Shop as well. So, yeah, you can email me at reservedonlyshop@gmail.com too.
Okay. And I will have all T's contact information in the show notes for this episode. And you can reach out to her. I will link to her website. Again, that's reservedonly.com. And of course, her Etsy shop, Reserved Only. T, thank you so much for being my guest and for sharing about your journey on Etsy and your experiences and also talking about something that we haven't talked about here before, the issue of net neutrality. I think it's good to get the word out. I will link to additional resources, but thank you for explaining what you're doing to try and just make sure that the internet stays free and fair.
Yes, and thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
You are so welcome. And I thank you for listening to the podcast. I will be back next week.
Thank you for listening. You can subscribe to the podcast in iTunes, and while you're there, please leave a review too. Visit convome.com to leave a comment or feedback on this episode.